Hello, and welcome back to France Made Simple, the podcast where I make living in France as easy and simple as Frenchly possible. And thank you to our lovely sponsors, Fab French Insurance, who will help you with all matters insurance and make life as simple as Frenchly possible. So, first off, excuse my voice, which may pack up at any point during the proceedings. Like everybody else in the area, I've been ill for the last week. Just vague lurgy, but periodically the voice goes. Anyway, today we're tackling a subject that I've had a few questions about, and quite often people moving here are fairly interested in. And it's about how you can go off grid or at least live a more sustainable life on the cheap. Now, I think we've all felt it from time to time, the sort of pressure from the daily commute, endless bloody emails, and the pressure to keep climbing the career ladder. Although I must admit, I never really got past the first few rungs on the career ladder, but that's another story. But before long, you kind of start to feel like you're being forcibly pulled further and further away from what really matters to you in life. And for many people, that point comes in midlife when I guess the idea of success starts to shift. It stops being about bigger houses or buying fancy cars and material stuff, and it starts being about time and family and freedom and people. And that's often the point when the growing pull towards a really big lifestyle change sets in. Now, ladies, if you're unfortunate, and yes, I'm speaking from not so bitter experience here, you may be married to somebody with a Peter Pan complex who can't handle the idea of getting old and decides to knack off with a younger model, leaving you up the proverbial without a paddle. But in this case, don't fear, all is not lost. This podcast is definitely for you. But if you're still happily married and you're both looking for something else, note I said something, not someone, this may well be the point when the urge to make a big lifestyle change comes in. And for loads of people who are thinking about making that change, moving to France, this lifestyle change often entails, I suppose, a fair degree of self-sufficiency. I did warn you. So I think the rising cost of living has made many of us realise that working harder doesn't necessarily lead to more freedom. And financial freedom is definitely something that's getting harder and harder to achieve. Lifestyle burnouts become a reality, unfortunately, for many, and more people are looking to create some kind of different lifestyle. One where they might earn less, but life also costs them less. And above all, they have more time and actually get to spend that time doing the things that they enjoy doing. You could almost say that people are throwing themselves a lifeline. Now, that lifeline is going to be different for everybody. For some people, it's going to mean downsizing and moving somewhere with space to plant a garden or keep a few chickens. So France, perfect. For others, it's a full-scale reset. They want to swap their corporate jobs and mortgage payments for solar panels, vegetable patches, and a calendar shaped by the seasons, or even the moon. And as we all love doing everything by the moon in France, that's basically France with knobs on. And the wonderful thing about doing this in France is that you don't need to have a huge budget, a background in construction, or a plan beyond wanting to live differently. Property here is still cheap enough to make this feasible, and there's enough information on YouTube these days for anyone to learn how to do just about anything. So if you need to learn to mix concrete or shear a sheep, the information and advice is definitely out there. So how do you go about doing this? I would say it all starts with finding the right property. And if you want a self-sufficient life, the very first step is finding a place where that can actually happen. Now, in rural France, it's fairly easy and probably easier than in a lot of other countries because, quite simply, there are rundown properties all over the place and they're often going for a song. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to more urban regions or more popular regions, but France is a big country and there are still places where you can snag something and snag a bargain. Now, most of these properties will come with land, but the important question to ask yourself is whether that land is usable, or is it constructible if there's no existing dwelling on it? And when I mean usable, is it usable for what you want? Is the soil type okay? And can you get power and water to the property? Power you can work round, but water is pretty essential. So finding this property, my advice here would be to give the mainstream property sale sites a miss and focus on rural areas where demand is low and renovation projects often sit around unsold for years. Now, these regions often have various grants and subsidies available to people moving there to start businesses or farms. So this is another potential plus point, and we will be talking more about that in another episode. Personally, I think I would decide on the region factoring in the usual constraints when you're looking at any region, such as accessibility, property prices, climate, and of course, what you personally want to get out of living in France. And then start searching for properties that are going to suit your off-grid, in inverted commas, lifestyle. You can talk to local agents who specialise in country properties. Keep an eye on the notice boards in small towns. Look at online sites such as Le Bon Coin, which is the French kind of equivalent to Gumtree, and another one called Paru Vendu. That's PARUVENDU. I'm not even going to pronounce it. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it with a French accent this morning because my throat is too sore. Anyway, look at those sites and then spend some time exploring, nosing around the area. Nothing beats a good drive round looking for sale signs. And if you're really lucky, you'll see one that's been put up by the owners themselves, meaning that you can bypass the agent too, thus saving yourself even more money. Don't be afraid to view places that most rational, sane, normal people would walk away from, and don't be too set in your idea of what you're looking for. I know some people who ended up buying an outbuilding that had been used to house pigs. It was tiny, needed a lot of work, but it had good access, came with land, and it had the potential to become a home and the right size home for them. Now, obviously, there's a few key things to think about before you take the plunge. You need to check local planning or zoning laws to make sure you can keep animals or install solar panels or whatever it is you want to do. Look into water rights and whether you're allowed to collect rainwater or drill a well. Make sure the property has legal access, especially if it's down a rural track, and consider how far you're willing to be from basic services. Because really remote living sounds very romantic when you're thinking about being huddled by your log fire with your candles and your beloved, until you need supplies in the middle of winter and you're starting to squabble about who goes out to get the bog roll. Now, if you find what looks like the perfect property, and it may well be, or it may well not be, the very best place to find out all the answers to these type of questions and the local gossip once you're in the loop is the local town hall or mairie. So do pop in there, befriend them, and see what you can find out. Now, if you're trying to do this on a budget, you're going to need to renovate pretty much on a shoestring. Now, okay, this is possible, and I have done it, hopefully never again. And it's not always fun with a capital F, but it is doable. Now, I've lived in properties that were basically uninhabitable, with leaking roofs, bare stone walls and floors, no proper kitchens or bathrooms. But if the property is safe, i.e., it's not going to fall down on your head in the middle of the night. Excuse me. Well, this is quite a bad bug, actually. Anyway, so if it's not going to fall down on your head in the middle of the night, you can set up camp in one room kind of thing while you're renovating the rest of the property around you. I've seen people install caravans and even a mobile home inside a barn or outbuilding, if you've got one, so that you've got somewhere warm and dry to retreat to at the end of the day. And this also means that you don't get soaked to the skin when you open the caravan door first thing in the morning. Now, one setup I saw was particularly dark and gloomy because there were no windows in said barn. But hey, there's always tea lights, and you can even order online from IKEA these days. Now, cooking in a caravan or even on a small camping stove outside your caravan in your barn, washing in a bucket, etc., not ideal. Pretty grim outside of the summer months, but it's doable. And living on site will mean that you save a ton in rent and means that every last centime can go into the project. More importantly, perhaps, or as importantly, it also means that things generally move along faster on site, especially if you're using contractors for any of the work. Because being there 24/7 means that you can keep a really close eye on things, and you'll also almost certainly get a load of respect from any builders you're using, and maybe even a bit of sympathy. Even if they think you're completely mad, they will kind of respect what you're doing and feel sorry for you, and this might help speed things up. Now, when it comes to the work, you can tackle almost anything yourself. You can insulate the roof, build interior walls, install plumbing and even electrics, but you do need to make sure that you know what current regulations are and stick to them. You can tile the floors and point the walls, and you can learn as you go along, and with the help of YouTube tutorials, local advice, picking people's brains, and a lot of trial and error, you are bound to get there eventually. Oh, that's better. Right, so you need to also think about stretching your budget, and you can opt for second-hand materials, repurpose anything you can find, and barter with neighbours for leftover supplies. You can source nearly everything secondhand these days, from doors and windows to the wood burner and kitchen units. And buying materials in stages also helps spread out costs and lets you focus on the most essential work first. So it does take more time finding everything secondhand, but plan out your project, take your time, and look around, and you can save a ton of money. Now, one of the biggest shifts when you decide to live off grid is figuring out how to power your home without relying on the usual utility suppliers. So that's energy, water, and heating. If you're doing this on a budget, I would suggest approaching it step by step, adding new systems as you can afford it and learning along the way. And this can result in a setup that is simple, affordable, and entirely self-sufficient. It's a complex subject. There's a lot to learn. Things are changing all the time, but if you do your research, you will get there. And when it comes to solar power, for example, instead of buying an expensive full kit, you can source parts individually and save a massive amount of money. Now, this is a really big subject, so I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of installing your own systems. For starters, I personally don't know enough, but all the information is out there. And if you do have questions, then I would really suggest you look on my website, www.survivefrance.com, where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are living in France, and many of whom have specialist knowledge on this type of subject and are very, very happy to help. So fire away with those questions. Now, water is another area where you can build your own solution quite simply and easily. You can collect rainwater from the roof, obviously. It comes from the sky, falls on the roof, not rocket science. Store it in large tanks and then run it through a basic filtration system to remove the debris and bacteria. And then you can use that water for washing, cleaning, and even, depending on your system and installation, after final filtration for drinking. Now, notice the caveat there, after final filtration and the installation of a proper system. Please don't all go and collect your rainwater, drink it, and get some kind of horrendous disease and then complain in the comments below. You've been warned. When it comes to fuel for cooking, gas bottles are fairly ideal. They're easy to replace, widely available, relatively inexpensive, although prices have shot up in the last few years. But they are a very practical choice for backup energy. I would go for entirely wood-powered heating because it's very easy to find decent second-hand wood-burning stoves, which can even be connected to power your hot water. Um, Provide your hot water rather, not power your hot water. You can tell I'm ill today. I would also opt for one with a flat top so that you can cook on them if your gas bottle runs out or there's some other issue, because they're ideal for kind of casseroles and that kind of stuff in the winter. You're doubling up there, you're heating your house and cooking dinner at the same time. So really ideal for slow cooking. You can boil a kettle on in them too. And most of your wood will hopefully come from the trees on your land, which you have. Um, or you can get fallen branches, and people in the country are often very happy for you to come and clear stuff if they've trimmed hedges and there's enough little, but sizable, they call it petit bois, but sizable logs. It's all going to waste otherwise. And then you can always get a delivery from a wood supplier to top it up. Now, when it comes to waste, you could go for a composting toilet to stay fully off grid, which means you don't need water or a septic tank system. And once you understand how to manage it, it's fairly low maintenance. You simply layer sawdust over the waste to reduce the odour, breaks down naturally over time, and eventually becomes compost for your non-edible plants. Obviously, the biggest advantages here are the cost savings and independence from plumbing. Does require a bit more hands-on maintenance than a conventional loo, but if they are properly installed and maintained, they do not smell and they're super eco-friendly. So that's maybe something to think about. Not for everybody, but it is a great solution if you don't want to install a traditional plumbing and sewage system. Now, I think when it comes to off-grid life, food is really at the heart of it. Or, even if you're not going properly off-grid, moving to France generally means some degree of self-sufficiency for most people. Now, you may want to get to the stage where almost everything you eat comes from your land, and this will mean that your meals will change with the seasons and nothing goes to waste. It also means that you need enough space to install a decent sized veggie patch, maybe plant some fruit trees and keep your chickens. It does take planning, patience, and a lot of hard graft, but the upside and the reward is a diet that is fresh, sustainable, incredibly affordable, and so rewarding. The vegetable garden is key, I think. You need to grow a fairly wide variety of produce without going mad. Focus on crops that store well, can be preserved for the winter. So think sort of potatoes, onions, carrots, which you can store in a cool, dark outbuilding. And then you can have tomatoes, beans, courgettes, stuff like that, which you can bottle, dry, preserve, freeze. But most of all, grow the stuff you like and grow the stuff you want to eat. Again, in this episode, I'm not going to dive too deeply into this. A, we don't have time, and B, there are plenty of people out there who know way more than me. I'm very much an amateur veggie gardener. But there are some basics to stick to, which will make life fairly simple. The starters, if you have gluts of produce, transform them into something else. The French love chutney, le chutney, and pickles. Make sure you plant around the seasons, rotate your crops to keep the soil healthy, and you can use companion planting to improve your yields without resorting to chemicals, which is both better for the environment and cheaper for you. Make sure you save some seeds from every harvest. This is going to cut your costs further, but because you won't have to buy the seeds next year. But even better, you're going to end up with plants adapted to the soil and climate, because obviously you're only going to get seeds from plants which have actually grown and succeeded in your particular area. Now, if you want animals, you could go with goats for butter and yogurt. You could. I've had goats and they were a pain in the arse. Chickens, highly recommend, as they're going to provide you with eggs year round. So do ducks. They actually lay more eggs per year than chickens. You can also eat your ducks and chickens if you can. Bring yourself to do that. I can't, but I did grow up in London. Um, you might even want bees. You can start with a single hive, and yeah, you will need to spend money on basic equipment and protective gear. Although we have just swapped a second-hand hive or ruche for some wood. We've got four, and we harvested 110 kilos this year from four hives. Honey is a great currency, if you like, in rural life. Being able to swap or donate or give jars of honey to the neighbours will make sure that you get something in return. Bees also pollinate your garden, very important for your veggie patch, and improve the yields and keep the ecosystem balanced. So I think eating seasonally becomes second nature, and that's very much part of life here in France, especially in the countryside. Everybody forages, it's kind of a way of life, and everybody swaps. We've got a lovely walnut tree and we share our hoard with the friends and neighbours around, because there's no way we could get through all of the walnuts. And in return, we get given all kinds of things from chutney to soup. And I think that living off grid isn't just about growing your own food or generating your own power, it's also about changing the way you consume. You need to kind of build your lifestyle around the principle of using what you have, wasting as little as possible, and creating rather than buying. And over time, that mindset will become second nature. It certainly has for me. You can learn to make soap, basic beauty products, household cleaning products too, from, I don't know, laundry detergent to surface cleaning spray, using really simple ingredients such as white vinegar, baking soda, and essential oils. And these kind of homemade alternatives cost a fraction of the stuff you'd buy in store, and you know exactly what's in them. And reusing stuff and recycling becomes increasingly important too. Not a single jam jar gets thrown out round here. It gets washed, put into the outbuilding, stored, ready to be filled with something else, or even donated to somebody that's making jam and needs jars. And of course, if you give somebody 20 clean jam jars, they're going to give you a pot of jam in return. All of this will dramatically reduce your reliance on supermarkets, and growing your own means that most of your food doesn't come from the shops, and occasionally bulk buying staples like, I don't know, rice, pasta, and loo paper means fewer trips to town, less packaging, less cost, less expense, and you're doing your little bit for the environment. And I think this kind of lifestyle change has a really big impact on your mental and physical health. Living this way means that you're outside most of the day, moving constantly and staying physically active without even thinking about it. You don't need to go to the gym to work out. Just digging up the potatoes, that's enough of a workout. There's no daily rush, no endless to-do lists. Well, there are, but they're different types of lists and they're nicer. And there's no constant background noise of modern life, if you like. The decisions you make are going to be simpler because everything's kind of guided by necessity rather than convenience. And that's not to say it's always easy. Living off grid comes with challenges, especially in the winter when weather can disrupt solar power or make collecting water more difficult, or it can just be dark and grey and depressing. There are times when you need to fix stuff urgently and it costs money, or when crops fail. Something got at all of our parsnips. We haven't got a single one left. Who knows what it was, but it was very, very distressing. And you have to adjust whether it's your growing plan or what you're going to eat, or you've got to adjust accordingly. It can also be physically hard work, particularly during planting and harvest season. When we were harvesting apples a few weeks ago, I thought it was never going to end, but we have got over 100 kilos of apples stored for the winter. But I think you learn to see these moments as part of the lifestyle rather than setbacks. And if you plan well and you're flexible and you've got a willingness to adapt, you'll get through it. So, top tips for trying this kind of off grid lifestyle, and for anybody thinking about doing something similar, I would say always have a small emergency fund, because things will break and getting stuff fixed in rural areas can take time. Plan your budget with the seasons in mind, because winter often costs more than summer. Learn to do as much maintenance and repair work as possible yourself, which can save you hundreds every year. Things like chainsaws are constantly breaking down, so try and learn how to fix them. That will save you time and money. And don't underestimate how much small expenses add up. It's really easy to overspend on stuff like animal feed, tools, or unnecessary gadgets. So track every expense carefully in your first year or so to see where the money really goes. So, could you do this? I guess the idea of going completely off grid can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to happen overnight, and you don't have to go totally off grid. I would say that most people who live like this start small. You learn one skill at a time and you kind of build up your confidence before making bigger changes. And I think the key is to think of it as a journey rather than a single leap. A really good place to start with is with food. Now, even if you're still living in a town, you can grow herbs or a few plants in containers on your balcony. Just cherry tomatoes in the summer. It's a really practical first step. It will teach you about soil management, watering, plant care, and more importantly, you start to understand how rewarding it feels to eat something you've grown yourself. And I think the other thing to start early on in your journey is learning DIY skills. Being able to handle kind of basic repairs, build simple structures, or repurpose materials is going to save you money and make off-grid living much more achievable. Now, these days there's so much information online, and it's so easy to learn without spending too much. And again, understanding renewable energy is another valuable step that you can embark on that before leaping into the whole off-grid lifestyle. You don't need to become an expert overnight, but learning how solar power works, how to calculate your energy needs, and what kind of equipment you're going to require gives you a solid foundation. And, get in touch with other people who are already on this path. There's a wealth of information out there, as I've said previously. And I think that those kind of community forums focusing on permaculture, homesteading, and sustainable living are really, really helpful. And most people, in fact, not many people, almost everybody I've ever met who's embarked on this kind of journey is absolutely eager, as keen as mustard, to help, other people do the same do the same without making the same kind of mistakes that they made. A bit like this blog, really. So if you're interested in going off grid, living a more sustainable lifestyle, I suppose overall my tip would be start small, see it as a journey, realize that every skill you're going to learn along the way is going to build on the last one, and before long you will have that kind of solid foundation to support your more self-sufficient lifestyle. Start small, start with what you have, think about what you want to do when you move to France, and let it go from there. You don't need to go mad. You don't need to be thinking that you've got to milk your own yaks. I don't know, weave your cat's shredded malted fur into winter jumpers, or make slippers out of your deceased guinea pigs. But everybody can do a little bit, and it's very much what people moving to France are aspiring to do. So I hope that's been useful. Obviously, there are probably some people listening to this thinking, well, I don't want to move to France and do that. I want to live in an apartment in the middle of Marseille. Thank you very much. Fine. We'll get on to city living in another episode because that's another interesting subject too. But for those of you that do want to milk your yaks, make your cat's fur into winter jumpers, or turn your deceased guinea pigs into slippers, I really hope this episode has been informative and enjoyable. And once again, apologies for my general wheeziness, croakiness, and not being quite on the ball. But I knew that if I didn't get round to recording this podcast today, it would never happen. Have a great week and see you soon. Thank you for listening. Bye bye.